My name is James Crawford. I'm 73 years old. What I'm about to share with you in the next few minutes, I genuinely wish someone had grabbed me by the collar and forced me to hear when I was younger. I'm not being dramatic. Stay with me, don't skip ahead, because every single one of these points hits differently when you actually stop and think about it. I've spent decades watching people, myself very much included, quietly wreck perfectly good lives over the same handful of mistakes. These aren't the dramatic headline-making kind. These are the silent ones, the ones that chew you up from the inside over 10, 20, 30 years, until one morning you look around and wonder how you ended up so impossibly far from where you meant to be. Here are 10 of them, and I guarantee at least 3 will make you squirm. 1. Treating your body like the bill will never come. The bill doesn't come. The verdict does. I started smoking at 16 and didn't stop until I was 44. 28 years. Toward the end, I wasn't even enjoying it anymore. I kept going because quitting felt like too much effort. You know what else takes effort? Sitting in a cardiologist's office at 57 while he tells you your arteries look like corroded pipes that haven't been cleaned in decades. Nobody in their 30s or 40s truly believes their body is keeping a record. But it is. Every meal you skipped and replaced with junk. Every night you slept 4 hours and called it enough. Every year you spent glued to the couch convincing yourself you'd start exercising next month. Your body logged all of it. I had a colleague named Douglas who ran marathons at 40. He thought he was invincible. At 52, his back collapsed so severely he couldn't bend down to tie his own shoes for 6 straight months. It wasn't the running that did it. It was 20 years of sitting in a desk chair for 8 hours a day without stretching a single time. Your body doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. It simply waits for the right moment to present the bill. And by then, the interest has compounded beyond anything you imagined. 2. Choosing comfort over honesty with the people you love most. My brother Thomas and I didn't speak for 11 years. 11 entire years. Over something so absurdly small that I'm almost ashamed to admit it now. He borrowed money from our mother without telling me. I found out, and instead of doing the simple adult thing, picking up the phone and saying, "Thomas, that bothered me and here's why," I froze him out completely. Just stopped calling. Stopped showing up. Thanksgiving came and went in silence. His children grew up not knowing their uncle. Birthday cards stopped. Holiday dinners had an empty chair that everyone pretended not to notice. And the entire time, I told myself I was the wronged party, so it was his responsibility to make things right. You know what that actually is? That's cowardice wearing a disguise called pride. I could have picked up the phone on any ordinary Tuesday afternoon and spoken 5 honest words. I chose not to. We finally reconciled when his wife called me from the hospital during his knee replacement surgery. 11 years of frozen silence, resolved in roughly 40 minutes of actual conversation once we finally sat down and had it. 40 minutes. That's all it took. And I'd wasted over a decade avoiding it. 3. Measuring yourself against people playing an entirely different game. My neighbor in the 80s, a man named Victor Russo, bought a boat. A gorgeous thing. It sat in his driveway on a trailer, gleaming in the sun. He used it maybe 6 times in 4 years. But every Saturday morning he'd be out there waxing and polishing it. And every Saturday morning I'd stand at my kitchen window feeling like an absolute failure because I couldn't afford one. A boat that I didn't even want. I didn't fish. I never fished. I got violently seasick on anything larger than a bathtub. But Victor had one and I didn't. And somehow my brain translated that simple fact into evidence that I was falling behind. Behind what exactly? Behind whom? There was no race. I invented one entirely inside my own head and then spent months being upset that I wasn't winning it. We do this constantly and compulsively. Promotions, houses, vacations, cars, even our children's grades. We compare our Chapter 4 to someone else's Chapter 12. Completely different timelines, completely different goals, completely different definitions of success, and then feel inadequate about a gap that doesn't actually exist. It's a game with no finish line and no winner, and it will drain every last drop of satisfaction from what you actually have. 4. Believing the important things can wait until life calms down. Life doesn't calm down. It shifts. New problems replace old ones with perfect efficiency. New obligations rush in to fill every gap the old ones left behind. The quiet space you're waiting for doesn't exist and never will. I told myself for 15 years that I would learn to play the piano. My grandmother had a beautiful upright in her living room, and as a child I used to climb onto the bench and press the keys with clumsy fingers. And she would smile and say, "Jimmy, you've got the hands for it." 15 years of next year. Then my knees went bad. Then my eyes needed surgery. Then there was the problem with the roof. Then my son's college tuition consumed every spare dollar. And suddenly, almost without warning, I'm 73, and the piano is still theoretical. I did eventually start lessons at 68 for what it's worth. I'm dreadful, genuinely spectacularly bad. My instructor, a remarkably patient woman named Margaret, once told me I had the rhythm of someone attempting to walk across a frozen lake in dress shoes. But I'm dreadful and I'm happy about it, which is considerably more than I can say for the decades I spent waiting for the mythical perfect moment that was never ever going to arrive. 5. Clinging to a version of yourself that expired years ago. I was a varsity wrestler in high school, 154 pounds, conference semi-finalist, the single proudest achievement of my entire adolescence. It was the first time I felt genuinely exceptional at something. I was still telling that story at dinner parties in my mid-50s, bringing it up unprompted, steering conversations toward it, finding ways to casually mention it as if it were recent news. My daughter finally said to me, gently but firmly, "Dad, that was 35 years ago." She wasn't being cruel. She was being accurate. And hearing it stung precisely because she was right. I had been so deeply attached to who I was at 17 that I hadn't invested any real energy into becoming someone interesting since then. I was living off the fumes of a decades-old achievement, like it was still generating heat. Your past accomplishments are perfectly fine as memories. They're absolutely terrible as an identity. They belong in photo albums, not on your business card. 6. Building your life around people who disappear when things get hard. I played cards with a group of guys every other Friday night for roughly 12 years. Good times, genuine laughter, plenty of cold beer and terrible jokes. I considered them close friends. I would have used that word without hesitation. Then in '96, my business partner emptied our shared account and vanished to Arizona without a trace or a word of explanation. My entire financial life collapsed overnight. Not one of those card-playing friends called. Not a single one. I wasn't expecting grand gestures or rescue missions. I just needed someone, anyone, to pick up a phone and say, "James, are you okay? Do you need anything?" That's it. 5 seconds of basic human concern. Nothing. Complete silence. The following Friday, cards resumed as if nothing had happened. When I finally brought it up, trying to be casual, one of them shrugged and said, "We figured you'd rather not talk about it." No, they'd rather not hear about it. There is an enormous difference between those two things. Fair weather people aren't necessarily bad people. Most of them genuinely don't realize what they're doing, or rather, what they're not doing. But constructing your entire social foundation around them is like building a house on sand. Everything looks solid and beautiful until the first genuine storm arrives. And then you're standing in the rubble, wondering why nothing held together. 7. Letting resentment become your default operating system. After my business partner disappeared with the money, I carried that fury around like a backpack filled with stones. For years. I brought it up everywhere. At barbecues, family dinners, doctor's appointments, grocery store checkout lines. I couldn't let a conversation go more than 20 minutes without steering it back to what had been done to me. My wife at the time, Catherine, finally looked me in the eye and said, "James, you're giving that man free rent in your head, and he's not even paying for utilities." She was absolutely right. Resentment doesn't punish the person who wronged you. It doesn't touch them at all. They're living their life somewhere, probably not thinking about you for even a moment. Meanwhile, you're the one drinking poison every single morning and waiting for them to feel sick. I'm not telling you to forgive everyone who has ever hurt you. Some things genuinely don't deserve forgiveness, and I won't pretend otherwise. But carrying them around every single day, revisiting them every single morning, letting them color every single interaction, that's a choice. And it's a choice that costs you infinitely more than it will ever cost them. 8. Treating every disagreement like a war you must win. I argued with my son about his college major for an entire summer. He wanted to study art history. I wanted him in business or engineering, something practical, something with a clear, reliable paycheck waiting at the end of the road. I made spreadsheets comparing average salaries. I pulled employment statistics. I printed articles about job market trends. I presented my case with the precision and aggression of a prosecutor pursuing a conviction, complete with exhibits and closing arguments. He listened politely through all of it, nodded at the appropriate moments. Then he quietly enrolled in art history anyway. He graduated, worked at a museum for 8 years. Now he runs educational programming for a nonprofit organization and genuinely, honestly, loves what he does every single morning when he wakes up. Meanwhile, I spent an entire summer systematically damaging our relationship, making him feel like his interests were frivolous, making him feel like his passions weren't valid, making him doubt himself, all over a decision that was never mine to make in the first place. Not every hill is worth dying on. If I'm being honest, most hills aren't even worth the walk to the top. 9. Confusing busyness with productivity, or worse, with human worth. I wore busyness like a badge of honor for decades. 60-hour work weeks were my minimum. Weekends at the office were standard procedure. I couldn't sit still on a Sunday afternoon without guilt crawling up my spine. as if resting were something I hadn't yet earned the right to do. And what did all those frantic hours actually produce? About half of them were pure wasted motion. Meetings that should have been phone calls that should have been two-sentence emails, tasks I stubbornly insisted on doing myself because delegating felt like admitting I couldn't handle the load. I was spinning my wheels at maximum speed, generating noise and exhaustion, and calling it progress. Looking back with honest eyes, the busiest years of my life produced the least meaningful results. The years where I deliberately slowed down, where I paused before acting, made careful choices, said no to things that didn't matter. Those were the years when things genuinely moved forward in ways that lasted. Busyness is not purpose. Activity is not achievement. Motion is not progress. And your value as a human being has absolutely nothing to do with how packed your calendar looks. It took me an embarrassingly long time to understand something that simple. 10. Waiting for some future life to arrive before appreciating the one you already have. This was the last lesson I learned, and it took the longest to sink in. I spent my 30s impatiently waiting for my 40s, when I'd supposedly have more money and more stability. I spent my 40s anxiously waiting for my 50s, when the kids would finally be grown and I'd have breathing room again. I spent my 50s counting down to retirement, absolutely convinced that real life, the good part, the part worth experiencing, would finally begin once I stopped working. And when retirement actually arrived, I sat in my kitchen on the very first Monday morning, coffee slowly going cold in my hand, staring at a calendar with absolutely nothing written on it, and thought, now what? I had been so relentlessly focused on getting somewhere else that I had sleepwalked straight through the actual journey. Decades of it, gone. Not because they were taken from me, but because I wasn't paying attention while they were happening. Every single stage of life has something in it worth noticing. Not in a sentimental greeting card kind of way, in a real, specific, ordinary, Tuesday afternoon kind of way. The sound of your house when everyone has fallen asleep and everything is finally still. A meal you cooked that turned out unexpectedly better than you hoped. A Thursday where absolutely nothing went wrong and nobody needed a single thing from you, and you just existed peacefully for a few hours. Those aren't small, insignificant moments. Those are the actual substance of a life. Those are the things you'll remember when you're my age, sitting in a quiet room, looking backward. We just fail to recognize them in real time because we're too busy scanning the horizon for something bigger, something shinier, something more dramatic, something that may never actually show up. Final words. Look, I'm not standing here pretending I've figured everything out. At 73, I still catch myself making at least half of these mistakes on a weekly basis. Old habits don't die. They just learn to hide better. But the difference between making these mistakes at 30 and making them at 73 is that now I can see them clearly for what they are. I can name them. I can feel them happening in real time. And occasionally, on a good day, I can stop myself before the damage is done. That's what I'm offering you today. Not perfection, not wisdom, not some magical formula for a flawless life. Just a head start. Just the benefit of somebody else's 7 decades of trial and error, so you don't have to repeat every single one yourself. So here's my challenge. Pick one of these 10, just one, whichever one made your stomach tighten a little while you were reading, whichever one made you think of a specific person, a specific conversation, a specific choice you've been avoiding, and do something about it this week, not next month, not when things calm down, this week. Not a grand overhaul, not a dramatic transformation, one conversation, one phone call, one small, quiet correction that nobody else even needs to know about. That's how things actually change. Not in explosions, in adjustments. That's all I've got for today.